Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to USTA Florida's Here to Serve podcast. My name is Laura Bowen, and I'm the Executive Director here at USTA Florida, and this is the second time we've done an in-person podcast. So if you're listening, be sure to check out our YouTube channel where you actually can see the full video. I'm especially pleased to be joined today by Lew Sherr, who is the CEO of USTA. Thanks for joining me, Lew.
Laura, it's a pleasure.
This isn't your first time here. You've been over here many times, so we're always happy
but to know that I'm the second in-person podcast is quite a distinction.
You will always have that honor.
There you go.
Put it in your signature.
We try harder.
Number two. All right. Well, what we usually do here on the podcast is for new guests, we ask them to tell us a little bit about their background in tennis and how they came to the USTA. So can you share that with our audience?
Happy to. So I had a dream, really started in college, that I wanted to work in sports. I had set my mind that if I was going to be successful professionally, I should work in a category I was excited about, energized about. I had colleagues that were going to Procter & Gamble and Goldman Sachs, and I didn't feel it, but I really was intrigued at the thought of working in sports, and had read a book at that time written by Mark McCormick, who started IMG, called What They Don't Teach You at Harvard Business School, that really opened my eyes to the industry around sports that I didn't really understand existed. I was fortunate. I was hired to go to work for Wilson Sporting Goods into a general management training program, and that eventually turned into a career in golf marketing, and I spent almost 7 years with Wilson in the golf area, both in Chicago working on domestic business, and then in Tokyo, Japan, running the golf group for Asia. And the interesting observation for me, or learning for me during that time period, was the novelty of working in sports started to wear off. And I found myself more energized by the business challenges than the atmosphere. And I liked the atmosphere, it was a team-oriented, work hard, play hard sort of business, but it was the business challenge, right? How do we grow our business, that was starting to dominate in my mind, and that's where my satisfaction came from. And that freed me up to really look at careers anywhere. And so Wilson had sent me to Japan, asked me to lead the golf group in Asia. We had a leadership change, and I was asked to come back. I opted not to do that, and rather went into consulting. Worked for a management consulting company that specialized in lifestyle brands, Nike, Pepsi, Frito-Lay, MTV. It was great work, but I hated consulting. Having had a P&L and run a business, just delivering a deck and a recommendation was so much less interesting to me. But I did spark to the new business aspect of consulting, where I started to spend more and more of my time going out and finding projects and not actually doing the work, transitioning those over. And that was the first instance where I thought my father's sales DNA may actually be in me somewhere, because he had spent his entire career in sales. So I did that for a few years, and this is now the late 90s when the first internet craze or bubble was taking hold, and I was recruited to lead the marketing function for a .com startup, and moved out to LA and did that for a period of time. One of our divisions was also the first ever digital cinema network with 50 college venues linked by satellite, and we were programming in concerts and comedy shows and seminars and panel discussions into college theaters on campus. I enjoyed that tremendously, and we rode a wave of nothing to public with $1 billion market cap, and then right back to nothing again. And we basically sold the business off for scrap. And then I was recruited to join a company called Clear Channel at the time, that today would be probably more closely associated with iHeartMedia, right? They owned all the radio stations in America. They had more billboards than anyone else in America, and they owned what are now the Live Nation amphitheaters and music venues around the country. And I was asked to lead a team that would be selling cross-platform integrated packages, media and sponsorship packages, to national advertisers. If you think about radio out of home, even the live music venue stuff, they tend to be very locally driven decisions, right? It's a car dealership. It's not the car brand. It's a local fast food restaurant, right? Exit here. It's not the big national campaigns. And that's what I was asked to do with Clear Channel, and did that for 4 years, enjoyed that quite a bit. And then they started selling off pieces of the business. So the amphitheaters went to Live Nation or Ticketmaster. The Billboard network was spun off in an IPO. And I went over to Time Warner to do essentially the same thing. At that time, Time Warner had Turner, CNN, HBO, AOL, Time Inc. magazines, DC Comics, Warner Brothers, all of these divisions that probably had 70 or 80 different salespeople calling on larger national advertisers. My job, I was one of 4 that were dividing up the 20 largest ad spenders across the full enterprise, trying to develop a top-to-top relationship with the CMOs at those companies and trying to deliver more value to our divisions. And so I did that and was only there a short time, about 2 years, but a former colleague of mine had gone over to Madison Square Garden into a head of sales and marketing role, and started sort of reaching out to me to meet him for breakfast, and wanted to, his track was marketing, mine had been more through sales, and wanted to bounce ideas off me and ask for my input. And over about 3 months of sort of, regular breakfast, he went in and pitched a new structure for their organization, and then came back and said, hey, the structure was very well received. In fact, so well received, we'd like to hire you into one of those roles that you had created. So it was a chance for me to get back in sports, which at this stage of my career was kind of exciting again. I had had some professional success, and now here was a chance to get back in the environment. But that takes me to 2000, basically 7 through 2010. And I was contacted by the USTA, or the search firm, about a position overseeing sponsorship sales. This is 12 years ago. And as I started to look at the business of the US Open, and you're familiar with it, but I wasn't nearly as familiar with it as I was some of the other properties. And I lived in New York and had attended. But when you start to look at the business of the US Open, global television, blue chip sponsors, right? We generate more revenue in 2 weeks than an NBA team would generate in a year, right? And it just got more and more interesting to me, and was thrilled to join the organization. And now it's been 12 years, and I've been able to step into this new role, and I can say I've never looked back.
Well, it's like all of your experience sort of merged together in that wonderful journey to bring you to USTA, and then now here as
I think the combination of sports, I think the brand management experience early in my career and educational training helped me be a better salesperson, because I could empathize and anticipate the issues for the person on the other side of the table. I had been in those brand management roles, and I think that was helpful, and a broader business perspective certainly I think was helpful as I went through the track. And now to have great analogs for other professional sports businesses as I joined the USGA, and then 12 years here, the opportunity just to learn and be around the organization, to work for a purpose-led organization as opposed to a for-profit entity, and what that means is just much more gratifying for me to be here doing what I do and what I've been able to do than to do it for an owner.
Well, we're lucky to have you for sure, and I think obviously early in your career, focusing on golf for Wilson, there are a lot of parallels. They're not exact, but there are a lot of parallels. So, I think that too, everything we do in life sort of is an education and a preparation, and we are the beneficiaries now of all of that education and the preparation. So I do want to talk a little bit about your role before you took on the CEO role. You were the Chief Revenue Officer at USTA. Can you share some of those highlights from your time in that role, because you did that for over a decade?
So it's a great job, and I used to tell everybody that I knew in the industry, it may be one of the great jobs in sports when you look at the business as I was describing it to you earlier. The opportunity to oversee a broadcast rights business that is global, to work with the best-in-class broadcasters around the world, whether it be ESPN here in the US or Eurosport across Europe, Wow Wow in Japan, right? There's a significant global broadcast component, which is really fascinating, was new for me. We have a massive ticket and hospitality business, right, that generates well over $150 million annually, which with more attendees than you would get at a season with an NFL team, a basketball team, a hockey team. It's a great, great business, a sponsorship business. Again, global partners, best in class, whether it's Rolex, JP Morgan Chase, IBM, American Express. It's really a privilege to be able to work on that business. And when I look back now on a decade in that role, some of the things I would say I'm proudest of, the team that we built. We have an incredibly strong commercial team, mostly based up in New York, that work this event and work all of those lines of business. They've been with us for a long time. It was a combination of development and some smart hires. We were very fortunate to bring some folks into the organization, but there's a great team there that really operates well and has amazing continuity and expertise. From a result standpoint, I would say the biggest highlight or accomplishment that I can point to is in 2018, we were able to exceed $100 million in gross sponsorship revenue. And that was a goal that we had set back in 2013. When we announced that we were going to be reconstructing or transforming the Billie Jean King National Tennis Center, a number of us stepped back on the commercial side and said, we've got an opportunity here to look at this, not as a series of incremental modifications, but if we were building a new venue and opening it on day one, right? You could sell it as a new venue. We're 5 years out. None of our contracts go out that far. We have an opportunity to stop and say, if we were starting the business today or starting the business in 2018, what would we want it to look like?
Right.
Which rarely does a successful business have an opportunity to reinvent themselves. Typically, right, business has to be really bad for you to blow it up. This was a chance to say, hey, 5 years from now, we're going to change our business rules, and we want to go out and start to sell our partners on those new policies, that new approach, which was heavily centered around fewer, bigger, better partners, as opposed to the industry, which was putting signs on everything. And we were approached, what if we put signs on the seat backs and on the stairways and all of this, and changed out partners and everything was rotating. We went the other way and said, if we can add more value to those who are already engaged with us in a significant way and spending with us, both in terms of fee and their activation, we can grow our business bigger and faster, and thankfully that was the result. And so we limited the number of partners and we increased our fees, but we gave our partners more value because they weren't being encroached or feeling like they were being elbowed by, here's partner 3, 4, 5, 6, all of a sudden activating around me. And thankfully that's worked incredibly well. And the team that devised this strategy is largely still in place, and it was 5 years of execution. So it wasn't just the result. The really special part was we identified a strategy and then we worked it for 5 years. And sure, it was refined along the way, but then to be able to exceed that goal, which seemed like a moonshot back in 2013, was really exciting.
And what you just described is really strategic planning in so many different ways, right? It's saying, hey, we're going to look out far enough to say this is what we want to be. We want to see us as a new entity, but have the discipline to get there and really go back to that every time we make a choice.
And we did a lot of stress testing in that planning thing. We spent months talking about, if we limit partners to this, and if you're not a sponsor, you can't have a booth any longer, and you can't gain hospitality access unless you do the following. And then we would sit and say, okay, let's go through our sponsor. How is that going to be received by every one of these partners? Does it work? Does it hold water? Right? So the planning was rigorous, but then it's 5 years of execution, right? So even an imperfect plan well executed probably takes you further than a brilliant plan with no execution. And in this case, the two met up, which was great.
Well, that's amazing, and kudos to you and to your team. It does take a village.
Yeah.
So you had a lot of success as the Chief Revenue Officer, got to do some super exciting things. What made you decide to pursue the CEO role? What was interesting to you about that?
I think the biggest reason is probably being a part of this organization and wanting to contribute to this organization in a new way before I think about the specific role. I have loved being a part of the U.S. You've heard me say this before, right? I am proud to work at the USTA. Every day that I have been here, I've been proud to work at the USTA because I love what we do. And to be in maybe a quasi for-profit sort of role, but for a nonprofit, mission-driven organization, for me was incredibly gratifying. And I saw this as an opportunity to contribute to the organization in a different way, in a new way. And also, I can't lie, I've been here, up until, for 12 years, and I've watched things go very well. I've watched some things that haven't gone well, and there have been points along the way where I've said, boy, if I had the opportunity, I might have looked at it differently or thought about this differently. And that's exciting to me to now be in a position to say, hey, you've learned and watched for 12 years, and now here's a chance to impact the culture, impact the structure, right? I don't know that I bring a ton of functional expertise to the participation side of the game, but for me, thinking about, hey, if we were going to take a more business-oriented approach to how we go about growing it, here's the chance to do it. And that was a big part of my proposition, right? Let's apply the same principles and use of data and analytics and strategic thought that we've applied on the commercial side, and let's try to dial that up on the participation side. And at the same time, the importance of relationships, the national relationships with our 17 sections, with everyone who's involved in the delivery of our sport is so important. And much of my career, we haven't really talked about it today, but much of my career in sales was built around building collaborative, trusting relationships. That's why our partners, it's something we prize. On the commercial side of the organization, we've had the longevity that we've had with our sponsors, and in many respects, the same principles apply, right? It's being open, being honest, being transparent. It's a win-win mindset. It's not a zero-sum mindset. And I felt like there was an opportunity here to add some value where my skill set and the needs of the organization were perhaps aligned.
It's interesting. We're in such a unique space that I think a lot of times the first question you get asked when you work here is, well, where did you play tennis? Or where do you play tennis? I don't think I'm not going to ask you those questions because I think, one of the things that is fascinating is to say, hire somebody that has different experience than what you already have, because they're going to make your group so much better. And I think one of the misperceptions, I know I have it here on a very, very small scale, is that people think I have sort of this all-powerful way of like changing rules and regulations, and they'll call me about an experience they had and they don't like a particular thing about our league or our programs, but that's not really the job that we're in. We're in a very different type of role, but I do think there's an interesting perception out there. So I wanted to ask you if you could talk about the primary responsibilities that you have as CEO of USTA, and give us maybe an overview of the business lines that you oversee, because I do think sometimes people think you're running programs or you're doing something that maybe isn't the job.
Yeah. So just to back up for a second to your original comment, which is I certainly wasn't hired for my tennis acumen.
Me either.
And so we're the same. I play recreationally with my kids. I enjoy the game. I love the sport. Right? There are so many reasons to love this sport. You can play it at 6 years old. You can play it at 96 years old. Boys and girls play equally. It can be as strenuous as you want it to be. It's accessible. You can go to a public middle school, high school and play. Can of balls is still $3.99, whatever. And so there are so many great reasons to love this game. And as a business, it's an incredible business. Individual athletes that are mega stars globally. It's the second most popular sport on the planet. I mean, there are a ton of great things there. But you're right, my role, and I was not brought in to bring a functional expertise. We have a ton of folks across our organization and top to bottom that understand the game and play the game at all levels. Craig Morris has a wealth of knowledge. Tracy Davies, folks in your organization, everywhere. We have that in spades. My role, as I see it, and it's unusual at the USTA because the range of outcomes are fairly expansive. You've got the US Open side over here, which is a professional sports event, an organization generating in excess of $400 million in revenue a year. That's a business, right? No mistake about it. But at the end of the day, it funds the mission of the organization, which is, in my mind, it's a focus on growing participation, right? We can improve people's lives through tennis. We don't talk about the why as much as we talk about the what, which is grow the sport. But tennis is a great way to improve the quality of someone's life, and if enough people are playing, the quality of life in America. And being part of a health and wellness organization is motivating, it's exciting. My job, first and foremost, is to help set the culture and drive the culture in a positive direction. It's to create the structure of the organization that hopefully allows us to operate effectively. It's to help with the setting of goals, making sure folks are empowered to deliver those goals and then are accountable for that performance. So a lot more of my role is making sure the foundation is in place for us to be successful, not necessarily to sit in a meeting and have a recommendation on a program or how to, what the field size should be at a national championship or those sorts of things. We've got folks who are much closer than I will ever be, and I'm not sure that's where I can add value, but if the right people are involved in a discussion, are we asking the right questions? Do we have the information we need to make a decision? And then are we holding ourselves accountable to track results and learn and advance along the way?
Yeah. That's a great description of it. I mean, I always tell people I'm here to manage the resources of the organization and make sure they're applied to the mission and the purpose. And I think you articulated it way better. And I think it's important that people understand that is, the role is to empower the rest of the organization to do it.
I'm still getting many of the same emails you're probably getting.
That's okay.
We direct them to folks who are better equipped to answer, but
a lot of times that leads to good questions. I always tell people that, like they'll say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I know you're busy," and I love when people call me and say, "Here's an issue, here's a problem, here's a concern that I have," because it makes me think. And then when I'm sitting in a meeting, I think, if I hear something, I'm like, I got this email from a player and they have a concern about this thing. Can you tell me more about that? And it's all great information. So I do appreciate all of the players. We have they're not shy. We have a very active player and provider base. And they always provide really good insights. Like you said, you have all the experts you need right there.
Well, the beauty is, right, you get those responses because people care.
Yes.
I'm only 3 months, not even yet, 3 months into this new role for me. I just want to learn as much as I can from wherever I can learn. So I love just being a part of conversations. Hopefully my presence doesn't distract or inhibit someone from being free with their opinions or their thoughts. But I'd love to hear the questions that are asked. Sometimes those are more helpful in terms of educating me on what the issues are than the answers that are given or the presentations that are prepared.
And you've been great about that. I think you've asked some great questions and have always really been open to hearing, like, hey, why is this? We ask, like, why is it done a certain way? You've always been very open to that.
I'm lucky in that I guess I'm not tied to some of the decisions of the past,
True.
right? And so I'm not institutionalized in my thinking as it relates to the mission either. I've been a part of the organization, but I haven't necessarily been a part of that piece of the organization. And so I can bring a bit of a fresh perspective, and I'm just curious.
Yeah.
We've had enough conversations. Yeah. I'm just genuinely curious.
I love that. And it comes through.
Yeah.
I think it really genuinely comes through that you're asking the question because you really want to know. So it's a good segue. Which of the business lines are you most looking forward to learning more about?
When I go home at night and I'm thinking about work nowadays, I'm thinking about driving participation, right? That to me, at some point in time, I will no longer be in this role and I'll want to look back on, did I have an impact? Did we impact participation? And so that's what's driving, look, the US Open piece of the business, I love, I have a strong attachment to, I love our partners, I love that business, I've worked that business for many years. There are a number of things that we do, but for me now it's are we doing the things we need to do to be successful in driving participation? And what's connected to that is, are we working well in partnership with our sections, with those closest to the delivery? And so that's the fun part, that's the challenge, right? How do we get those who are closest to the ground to be able to make decisions, make sure that information flows up, and then we're providing resources to allow those to then act on it, right? Because everyone's opportunities, everyone's challenges are a little bit different, in some cases quite different.
Right.
But that's what I'm sort of thinking about. How do we crack that code so that we can actually deliver resources and support where it can be most effective in terms of growing the sport and getting more people involved and improving more lives as a result.
And that's the ongoing puzzle, right? It's like if we had asked that question 2-3 years ago, it would have been a very different question or answer than now. It's something you're always working at. And the grassroots side of the game is ever changing.
Sure.
Consumers are changing.
Right.
So I think for people who are curious and who are problem solvers and who they get bored if they find the answer and they figure it out, it's a really great industry to be in because it's never the same. No 2 years are ever the same.
You're absolutely right. And there's so many trends now that are impacting sports participation, particularly with youth. And the players that will likely pick up rackets in the future are not going to look like the players who picked up rackets in the past. And it's fascinating in that. It requires you to constantly be nimble and ear to the ground and looking for new opportunities. But I do think there are trends and things you can react to that will start to make a positive change over time, and then you're refining, right? Because population shifts don't happen overnight, right? So you can hopefully you sort of see what's coming, you start to align with that, you make progress, and then you're refining along the way.
And let's hope that's a space around. COVID was a little unusual.
Yes.
It sort of like changed a lot.
COVID certainly changed the landscape, and in some respects, we benefited.
Yeah. Since taking on the role of CEO, what has been your biggest surprise and also your biggest challenge?
The biggest surprise for me, and some of it may still be a function of the hybrid work environment that we're in and the construction that's happening over next door at the national campus. I find myself feeling increasingly isolated from a lot of my colleagues in the organization, whereas historically I would be in department meetings, I'd be engaging with our commercial team at all levels of the organization. Depending on what the issue was, that group was in a meeting with me, or I would sit in on a department meeting or a team meeting. Now I find that most of my conversations are amongst the senior management group or individuals within the senior management group. And I'm struggling with ways to break out of that. I want more interaction. We don't necessarily have everyone back here yet, and I'm looking forward to getting everyone back and having the opportunity to interact. But I'm also noting that now, all of my information is being filtered through, smaller conversations with fewer folks. And it also doesn't give me the opportunity to interact with some of the great people and the talent across the organization at all levels. And so that's something I'm conscious of, and I've shared that with my colleagues on the senior management team to start to find opportunities to address that. From a challenge standpoint, this job is not lacking in challenges, but I do think changing the culture will be the biggest challenge and opportunity, right? Reacclimating ourselves to be of service to the sections, making sure that there is input at all stages from our section clients, our section partners, however you want to refer to them along the way. I find myself in a meeting and it's national staff, and one of the questions I'll often ask is there someone from the sections that should be a part of this conversation that could be really helpful, or multiple, right? And so figuring out that balance will be one, but changing the culture in an organization as large as we are, and doing it in this hybrid workspace where you don't necessarily have everyone together, and in particular here in Florida where the construction has kept us from getting everyone together, is absolutely a challenge, and it's one that I'm thinking about, our team is thinking about all the time. How do we energize the team? How do we keep them together? And how do we start to change the mindset to think about our roles as being of service to everyone who's delivering the sport at the lowest levels, and how that is not in any way, shape, or form a diminishment of a role. In fact, you're serving a higher purpose, but it does require a mindset shift that this is about servant leadership, and this is about providing resources and filling gaps for our partners, not necessarily a top-down driven approach.
Yeah, and I think even as the sections, it's something we have to remind ourselves every day that we're here to meet the consumer and the provider need at the grassroots level, and that's going to be different in Tallahassee than it is in Pensacola, than it is in Miami, and Tampa, and Jacksonville, and Daytona, and Orlando.
Yes.
It's a very diverse marketplace, and we're only one state, so
Yes. Well, we've talked about our roles. One of the interesting learnings is just how similar my role is with all of the EDs. And some have districts and state, right?
It's like a little microcosm.
It's
and we have
very
the same
similar.
things,
And the challenges you deal with are the same
100%.
challenges we deal with on a national level.
100%, and we saw the same things with virtual. People can do their jobs virtually. You and I can do our work. I can sit on my computer from anywhere. But even I was out for 2 weeks. I was out. We had meetings for a week, and you feel detached. You come back and you're sort of like, what's going on here? What's happening? And you do feel detached. And I think the virtual world will never replace that human interaction, and there's a balance there. And I think from a culture perspective, what creates the culture is the human interaction.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm excited to have you guys back and
I can't wait. I do think COVID has changed the workplace forever, but I don't think it is a permanent virtual world. I think it's about flexibility and valuing flexibility and being able to offer employees flexibility. I think the bar for travel and things like that has gotten much higher, which is efficient and terrific. But you've got to be able to get people together. You want to feel like you're a part of something bigger than yourself. That's part of the great thing of being at the USTA. We are a mission-driven organization. You want to feel that mission. You want to be able to celebrate successes as a group. And for new hires, whether they be early in their career or just new coming into the organization, right? You learn by watching. Look, I'm in this role partly because I had 12 years to learn through osmosis as I sat in conversations or was in proximity to decisions that were being made on the community tennis side. That would not have been the case if it was a virtual situation.
And I think as a new person, you're more inclined to ask your colleague who's sitting there a question than to get on virtual and maybe sound a little dumb because you don't know something. And we've seen that play out too, that the people who were hired during COVID by and large had a more negative experience of, I didn't really feel like I knew how to do my job, I didn't feel like I had enough help. So it's a fascinating era that we've gone through, and we'll learn more, I'm sure.
But the priority around providing flexibility will never go away.
I agree.
Which will be important, and I think we'll start to do more things socially as organizations, right? More morale building sort of social events that folks may want to look forward to being together with their peers. I think it's going to be interesting over the next few years to see how it all changes.
I'm very excited about that for sure. Let's talk about the U.S. Open for a minute.
Yeah.
We just had a conversation about this recently. Where is the Open a clear leader among the Grand Slams, and what challenges or opportunities do we have to make it even better going forward?
Yeah. If you were to stack up the U.S. Open commercially relative to the four Grand Slam brothers and sisters, we are clearly the leader in terms of revenue generation across our lines of business, right? We are absolutely the leader. I think we've integrated analytics in a way that is incredibly sophisticated and has helped drive our business and our thinking. And so in that sense, I think we're great. We're also, just in terms of the size of our event, we are the biggest spectacle in the sport of tennis. One of the things that's really interesting about the slams is they all have unique personalities, yet it's the same player field. Right? So Wimbledon is very much about history. Australia is known as the Happy Slam. It's a much more casual, informal event. The U.S. Open is the spectacular slam. The challenge with spectacular is that's a high bar to exceed every year.
Year.
History is fairly cheap, right? It happened already.
Right.
You don't have to reinvest in history, but spectacular is a high bar to exceed every year. And you're up against not just your own tennis prop, you're up against anything else that happened in sport, the Super Bowl, rock concerts, right? To deliver on that promise. So that's the challenge. That's where we excel and have excelled for many years. Unlike other sports in the US, we're not fighting with our own broadcast for attendees, and that's been a big concern. If you're at the NFL, you have many fans who say, I'd rather watch the game on TV, it's a better experience. You don't get that at the US Open because we're a festival. And part of the experience is what you do when you're there that's not watching the game. It's eating, it's shopping, it's people watching, it's drinking, it's all of those things. You're there for 8 hours, you're only spending half of the time watching the sport. So I think we've done a great job with that. And that goes back to folks who were here a generation ago that had the foresight that if we just programmed for hardcore tennis fans, we'd never be able to grow as big as we'd love to grow. And so we created you could almost call it a wine and a food and wine festival. And tennis is at the core. It's a fascinating business. The growth for us and the opportunities where we don't excel, our history has been much more domestically focused. Now we're fortunate we're in the United States and the US market economically is so much larger than the other markets, and so we've been able to be the largest, really just feeding off of the domestic draw. As we think about the future, it's going to be much more important that we open up our aperture and think about fans around the world, broadcast partners around the world, bringing more fans to the event from outside the United States. They have more value. They spend more when they're on site. It's a fuller experience, right? When they're there. International partners sponsors who can help activate in other parts of the world and engage more fans. I think our peers, particularly the two European events that are used to working across country lines in Europe, are much more further along than we are in trying to engage fan bases outside of their domestic markets. And for us, that's going to be important, and it's a big world. And there's a lot of opportunity there, but it's a lot of work, and it's not inexpensive to impact the globe.
As you're talking, I'm thinking Miami Open is just sort of flashing lights in my brain because Itaú is the sponsor, and they have large fan bases that come from South America and just come in for that event.
The Miami Open may be more a South American event than it is a U.S. domestic event if you look at their partners and who's attending.
And even just attending it's really phenomenal in terms of how global tennis really is, and I think that's exciting. I did want to ask one follow-up about media and streaming, and one of the things we've noticed over the past several years, if you watch the slams, and I try to watch them all, it's sort of like this hodgepodge of you've got Peacock, which sort of came into the game, I think, in the past year with NBC and their rights, and it's created a lot of frustration, I think, for tennis fans, rightfully so, that they never can kind of quite figure out where is tennis on TV, where if you have golf, you have the Golf Channel, and you're watching it there. And so where do you see maybe as like the opportunities in media and streaming? Do you see a world where maybe we'd be able to see it more regularly in one spot, or do you see it continue to be somewhat fractured the way it is now?
I think it's more likely to remain somewhat fractured, but I don't think it's a media and streaming challenge. I think the reality of being part of a global tour is very different than golf, right? The golf that you're seeing here is the PGA Tour, and that's an American tour, right? So when you think about where are my favorite players playing and what's the time zone there, right? And the season goes for 9-10 months, right? It's hard to follow the tour. It's a bit more like Formula One racing, right? It's hard to follow, or the LPGA in golf, which is a global tour. It's hard to follow the tour. We as a sport need to do a better job making sure that there is a narrative over the course of a season that you can follow. You know where the players are. You know what events they're playing in, and yes, finding them more easily through streaming or through TV can help there. But that doesn't change the nature of it's a global game, and Serena's now playing in Europe, and before that she was in Asia, and now they're back, but then they leave and they come back again. So there's some challenges as a sport that we're all looking at to try to figure out what's the best presentation of our game to engage fans over the course of a season, right? I think you would agree, seeing combined events is great. It's a better presentation of our sport, but not all of the events are combined events. So we've got to figure that piece out. And then I think the streaming and the broadcasting piece will start to take care of itself. Yes, there are efficiencies to be found if you can. We went to all, US Open used to be on 3 different broadcasters, right? Now we're with one. And that certainly is helpful in terms of the audience knows where to go. You can extrapolate that out and say the same thing about tennis as a sport. Having said that, the NFL is the most popular sport in America, and they're on ESPN, they're on CBS, they're on NBC. They have an Amazon Prime Thursday night game, right? Sometimes they're on Saturdays and at parts of, but fans will find it because it's content they cut.
I think you touched on something earlier that was unique about that is that, with football, baseball, etc., you do have the opportunity to watch your local team, and we don't really have that so much in tennis. So I do think it's fascinating to see how the media services, and particularly streaming, evolve. The idea of Hulu didn't exist several years ago, right? But now you go on Hulu and you can kind of find just about everything. And I wonder if someday they're going to have a service where, say you did want to watch your favorite player in any sport, say it was Serena, or you wanted to follow your favorite quarterback from Ohio State or whatever, and you just basically select your favorite players, kind of like you do in the apps right now, and your TV service is going to feed up wherever they're playing. And I think the consumers are driving that train so fast forward. It would be fascinating to see how we play in that.
I think you're right, but then again, we're in a global sport, and so you have global consumers. But yes, it is moving in that direction. Can I follow my favorite actor the same way I follow my favorite tennis player on Netflix or whatever the case may be? That will come, but the broadcast partners are all getting very sophisticated. Right? It's hard to fathom that despite what technology may change, ESPN won't be a critical player in that mix and be available on whatever that platform is. Tennis lends itself beautifully to streaming. You may have matches at the US Open, right? You've got matches on 17 courts happening all at one time. You can't put that all on one linear feed, so now you give choice, which didn't exist before, which is terrific. But having said that, to me, it starts with the product first, and we've got to get the product right, and then the streaming strategy, the broadcast strategy will follow from that, and maybe can help with gaps and challenges that consumers have. But right now, we struggle with the lack of continuity. There are weeks that go by without an event, then there's an event, right? There's a lack of continuity, whereas, the PGA Tour, by example, is on multiple networks, but every weekend there's a golf event.
And my dad watches that
and the best players in the world are playing it every weekend. And then you get excited about the slams, but they're all on different broadcast networks. You will find them. But the continuity of presentation for our sport to me, is a bigger challenge right now than the media distribution challenge.
That's great. So speaking of the Open, you mentioned earlier how it does fuel our work here at the grassroots level. Without the Open, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. But the converse of that is our work here at the grassroots level actually brings fans to the Open. The more tennis people we have, the more they want to watch tennis. So how do you view the mission of USTA, how we sort of promote it and find it, and how we all work together to grow the game?
So it's a great question, and it was one of the eye-opening realizations I had a number of years back, and I forget which vendor it was we were meeting with. It was someone in the CRM space, the data and analytics space, and they've done a lot of work for professional leagues and sports franchises. And in every case study, the progression is, I want to take a young player, get them to become an attendee. Ultimately, I want to get them to be a season ticket holder. That is the pathway and the pinnacle. And it occurred to me that we're the exact opposite. We want to take fans who attend and watch on TV and get them on a court playing. It's the exact opposite of the business model that exists at the NBA or anywhere else, where the highest form of fandom is you're a season ticket buyer to your team, and that's the highest value that can be extracted out of that fan. We are at 180 from that. And the Open is unique in that it's a massive commercial property, but at the same time, we never lose sight of the fact that it exists. It's the best promotional platform we have in our sport. And that if there's a fan that can be inspired to want to play, we want to make sure they have access, whether that be through broadcast or inexpensive tickets on site. And so unlike many teams, I remember about 4 or 5 years ago, we increased our ticket pricing dramatically in the lower bowl, probably to the tune of 30%. At the same time, we lowered our pricing on 51% of the seats in the house, not because we weren't selling them, but because we felt like, hey, this growth over here is going to allow us to continue to make sure that anyone could have access to the US Open that might be inspired to play the game. Fan Week is free. We've made it free because, again, we want to encourage folks to see our sport at the highest level, the best representation of our sport, hopefully want to play. So we look at it, yes, it's that same virtuous cycle, but it goes in the opposite direction. For us, it's about getting people to the courts and driving interest in play, not about getting players into seats and buying merch and season tickets.
Interesting. I never thought of it that way, but that's really insightful in terms of how the cycle. And it
changes our thinking, because when we started to get media calls saying, we understand you raised your pricing quite a bit, we're like, well, actually 51% of the seats in the house are seeing decreases. But yes, the most expensive ticket went up significantly, but the least expensive ticket also went down in a similar percentage. So it blunted any of the criticism, but more importantly, we stayed true to our values, which are we want to make sure people can be inspired by.
And I think you mentioned something earlier about sort of the experience, and it reminded me that unlike other sports, I grew up as a baseball fan and played softball, and you would go and you were there to watch one game. But really, when you go to a tennis event and you buy a grounds pass or a day pass, I mean, you're really watching multiple things happen at the same time. So there are so many opportunities to get value out of that experience on site, not just the food and the entertainment, but to be able to watch really top tier tennis play. It's not just in the main stadium or
even if you think about qualifying.
Yeah, and sometimes just watching practice and watching, these players. I think you guys did a masterful job when you transformed the Open of being able to go in and watch the practice courts and making that, a really cool venue.
It's become a huge attraction for us. You're absolutely right, and we need to stay ever mindful that we're providing that experience. And the other piece to that experience, which doesn't get spoken about enough, the sponsors not only add value financially to the US Open and hosting guests and suites, by the way, right? Those guests had a great day at the US Open as a courtesy, thankful to Rolex or JP Morgan or Amex, whoever their host may have been. We're the beneficiaries of that, but they invest in their activations on site. And that's just more fun, more entertainment, more programming for our fans, courtesy of someone else who's willing to sort of underwrite that. So we work very closely with them also to make sure that what they're doing fits the context of the US Open. You often go to a sporting event and it's disruptive, right? There's a table in a concourse, sign up for this and get a shirt. It's not a basketball or an NFL related sort of engagement that heightens your satisfaction for having been there. It's typically something that's intrusive, but if there's enough of an incentive, you'll allow yourself to be imposed upon. We work very hard to not have that be the case. We want our partners to be a part of the experience in a way that is additive and celebrates the sport or enhances the quality of someone's experience when they come on site. It's all part of the ticket price.
And that makes sense. That's a lot of what we do at the professional tournaments is, we go and we say, hey, let's provide some value add here. Let's get people on court. Let's provide some fun activation for kids or adult beginners or somebody that, it's like, hey, I got on a court at the Miami Open. We do the adaptive work and wheelchair clinics and things like that. So I think that is just something that tennis needs to continue to do is how many additive experiences can we create so that this is something that people will take home with them and say, hey, I want to do more of that.
And it underscores the importance of the venue that I think not always gets addressed when they're at pro events where you focus more on maybe an appearance fee for a player that might drive ticketing as opposed to the venue and the quality of experiences off the court that you can provide, the food and beverage options, the entertainment options, the seating options, the shade options, right? Are you giving people shopping,
Florida,
right? Are you
shade.
giving people, right, a great day?
That's right.
Right? And you got think about it as a festival more so than just the competition on the court.
Well, I know we've covered a lot of ground today. I'm just going to leave my last question to you,
Yeah.
which is anything else you would like to share with our audience that I didn't ask you?
Look, you've covered a lot of ground, and we've had a lot of conversations. I just applaud the work that is being done here in Florida to grow the sport, and you've got a very sophisticated section that's involved in running facilities and running programs and supporting CTAs and others, Park and Rec. It's tremendous, and for me, it's just fascinating getting to learn each of the individual businesses because they are unique within the 17 sort of section USGA world, and the questions that I will continue to ask are how can we better serve those who are delivering the game, and that's a lengthy answer. Maybe you'll come and join me on a podcast, and I can ask those questions of you. But sincerely, I view our mission to be able to fill in gaps that you can't fill for yourselves. You spend so much time thinking about strategy and implementation, right? But your resources are limited, and where are there gaps that we can help fill? Information gaps, financial gaps, resource gaps, whatever, communication gaps, whatever, data gaps, whatever the issue might be. But I'm just thrilled that we've got this dialogue, and we're neighbors, and we have a chance to grow the sport
I'm
here.
sure this won't be the last time that we do this, and it's been just a joy to work with you over the last 3 months, or has it been 3 months? I think it's been 4
Getting
months.
close.
Time's flying. And we're very proud that, obviously USTA and the national campus, that you all are members of the Florida section.
Yeah.
So we very much view it as you are us, we're the same, and we're here to serve the game. And, that's why this podcast is called Here to Serve. And I think you've done an excellent job today. So thank you so much for coming and sharing. Appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure.
For those of you who are listening again to the audio-only version of this podcast, please be sure to go to USTA Florida's YouTube channel where you can see the full video in all of its glory. And of course, for all episodes of the Here to Serve podcast, including upcoming topics and dates, visit USTAFlorida.com/here to serve. Thank you for tuning in and have a wonderful day.